Welcome to Understanding the Bible with Pastor Stephen. This is Season 5, Episode 14, Proof of God, Philosophy 2.0. Last time we talked about philosophy, we gave the definition, we talked about ethics and morality, and making logical arguments. There are three basic laws of logic, the logical fallacies that you don't want to fall into, and how logic and absolute truth go together. Today, we're going to dig it deeper into the basic philosophy. So there's several different arguments, excuse me, and I just want to touch on a couple of them. But the argument from existence is one of the basic philosophical arguments. Why is there something rather than nothing? If the universe began to exist, then we have to ask what caused it. What could produce a universe from nothing? Because whatever begins to exist, which we can see things exist, has to have a cause. The universe at some point began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. This cause has to be outside the universe to have caused it. So the thing that caused the universe has to be outside of time, space, and material things, matter. If it created the material things, if it caused the material things to come into existence through a big bang or whatever. In addition to that, this cause has to be more powerful than the things that it caused. So think of our sun and how powerful the sun is. Now think of all of the suns in all of the galaxies. The thing that caused all that to come into existence has to have infinite power. The order of the universe, the spinning of the stars, the planets, the galaxies, everything in its continued existence that follows natural laws requires a personal entity with thoughtful design to put these things here and keep the laws. So, an all powerful, personal, thoughtful being that exists outside of time, space, and matter is the very definition of the God of the Bible. And that's why we have these discussions. That's why logically it makes sense that there is a God. Just the fact that we exist. Then we have objective morality. And this argument suggests that if objective moral values, right and wrong, exist, and they do, they cannot be explained by biology or culture alone. Instead, objective morality has to require a higher standard that transcends cultures, that transcends biology, and that is identified as a God. Because where else do you get higher morality than the king of a country? Well, it's who's higher than him. Who determines that what the king is doing is right or wrong? You, a peasant? No. What is right and wrong comes from something higher than the highest government. So that can only be a supernatural being who is higher above humanity for objective good versus evil. Then we have the arguments on human dignity. So people argue that the intrinsic value and dignity that we attribute to human beings as opposed to animals is best explained if humans were created in the image of something that was supremely good. Well, what is that thing? Again, something higher than humans. So some being that is better than us. Human dignity presupposes that there is something higher than humanity, something that put the dignity upon us. Oh, I don't know, being created in his image, maybe. Then we have the argument from consciousness, and this claims that non-physical aspects of human consciousness cannot be explained by material brain activity alone. And that is absolutely true. Human beings cannot understand the brain. That's just a fact. So the idea that we have consciousness and all the things that we experience in our consciousness, there's no way that electrical firings in the synapses can cause that, because animals have the same thing, but they don't have human consciousness. They don't have the metaphysical traits that we talk about. Not all of the ones that humans do. Certain animals have certain traits, but not all of them have them all. Humans are the only ones. We are unique in that regard. So we have this argument from consciousness that there must be a higher being. Then we have the idea of sensus divinitatis. And that's the idea that humans have an innate sense of the divine that doesn't even require complex proof. It's very much like our basic belief in the existence of the external world. We walk around in this world, we know it's there, we believe it. And yeah, of course, you'll find the anomaly one off who doesn't. But human beings through all time, in all cultures, have an innate sense of the divine that animals don't have. And most of the time, we don't even require proof for it. And most of the time, in most cultures, we gather together and create a religion based on that sense of the divine. So that tells us again that humans are different, that there is something out there that we have in our brains that makes us think there is a higher power. Well, what could that be? I could see how you might be delusional or I might be delusional, but I can't see how all of humanity and all cultures through all time would have that one primary basic sense of the divine if it wasn't put there. Does that make sense? Then we have this pragmatic argument. This is the Pascal's wager. And it's the argument that it's a safe bet that if you believe in God, you have the potential for infinite reward, eternal life. Whereas if you're wrong, it doesn't hurt you. You lived a good life. So this is Pascal's wager. The idea that um, logically, I should just believe in God because I'm better off for it. And if he's real, I win. If he's not real, I had a good life. What's the downside? So that's Pascal's wager. And it's just purely a pragmatic logic that doesn't prove the existence of God, but it's an argument for why you should believe it. So it's not a proof. And then we have the weakest argument, in my opinion, which is the ontological argument for God. And that was proposed by Saint Anselm of Canterbury in about 1033. Well, he was born in 1033 AD. He was born in Italy, a Benedictine monk and a philosopher who served as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he proposed that the very definition of God as the greatest conceivable being means that he has to exist. So his argument said that existing in reality is greater than existing only in somebody's mind. So if God is the greatest thing, then he can't just exist in people's minds. He has to exist in reality. So Anselm's core logic defined God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. So the greatest thing you can think of. If this being exists only in the mind, so you conceived of a God, right? The greatest being. But if there really was a God, then that would be greater than what was just in your mind. Something that exists in reality is better than just in your mind, right? So that's a contradiction. So therefore, by this definition of God, the greatest conceptualized being, a real God has to exist. Now, this is logically true if you believe his premise of what God is. I don't. I believe that God exists regardless of what you can conceive of or believe. I believe that God exists before humans existed. Before there was any concept of a God, there was God. So Anselm's premise makes human ideas or conceptualization of a God, they make his idea here makes you the creator of a God because you thought of him. And that would not be the God described in the Bible. So Anselm's logic here is that if you can conceive of it, it must exist. And to me, that makes humans the creator of God or greater gods than God. Now, the main criticism came from a contemporary of Anselm. He was also a monk at Canterbury, and it was Guanilo. And he argued that based on that logic, you could conceive of a perfect island and then go find it. It would exist because you brought it into existence by conceiving of it. And that's the main fault with this particular, the ontological argument. I don't agree with that one, but it's an argument that a lot of people use in philosophy. All right. Now, speaking of philosophy, most of you guys know Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, all the ancient philosophers. All right. So I'm going to delve into a couple of them, or three of them, real quick here. Socrates had a basic philosophy of God. And the reason I bring this up is he taught Plato, who came up with arguments for why God must exist. So Socrates was about 470 BC. He was a Greek philosopher from Athens, known as the father of Western philosophy. Now, he revolutionized thought by focusing on ethics, virtue, and logic rather than natural sciences. And he came up with the Socratic method, a system of question and answers aimed at exposing ignorance and fostering deeper understanding of the world. Socrates believed in a rational, moral, and singular divine authority, or God, that was fundamentally good and wise. And he was very different from the views of polytheism of his time. Many gods out there with different purposes. He believed that God's purpose was to improve human souls and that true piety was to emulate this virtuous God. So Socrates stated that he was guided by an inner divine voice that acted as his conscience, steering him from immorality. Key aspects of Socrates' philosophy on God were that the divine is goodness in and of itself, that there is a God versus the gods. He believed in a divine voice and a divine mission and virtue over ritual. So being good, being righteous over ritualistic religion. Okay. So he believed the divine is goodness in and of itself. God is the source of all good, and that if God acted immorally, as in some of the traditional myths of the gods, then he wasn't truly a god. He also believed in God singular. While referring to the gods of his day, Socrates frequently spoke in the singular of the God, theos, suggesting the monotheistic perspective of divine wisdom. And he wrote the oracle, or he did an oracle at Delphi, and he talked about it, um, or to the oracle at Delphi. He had a lot of writings, and you should Google Socrates and get some of his translated writings. Some of them are pretty good. But he also believed in the familiar sign or inner voice that spoke to him since his childhood, restraining him from wrong actions. And the Athenians misunderstood that as him talking about other gods coming in. And that's why he had the difference between the God versus the other gods. He felt that his mission, he had a divine mission by God to teach the Athenians to care for their souls and pursue virtue instead of wealth. So this stuff kind of lines up with the Bible, um, even though he never named the God of the Bible. But he believed in true worship, not just performing rituals, but living a just life through philosophy. And that's why he did what he did. He viewed it as his service to God, to the one God. Now, Plato, the guy that learned from him, he was born in 428 BC, and he was an ancient Greek philosopher in Athens who shaped Western philosophy, especially science and mathematics. And he was the teacher of Aristotle. Plato founded the Academy, which was the first institution of higher learning in the West, and he's famous for his dialogues, the theory of forms, and the Republic. Now, his arguments for a god are one called the Demiurge, which is the craftsman, and Plato argued that the universe is ordered, not chaotic. A benevolent, intelligent craftsman modeled the physical world after the perfect to make it as good as possible. He also believed in the form of the good. The highest principle in his philosophy was the good. And the good is the ultimate source of reality, truth, and being. And it functioned as the supreme divine standard from which all other forms derive their existence. Now, you'll see some of these philosophies played out in modern day in regards to this, the form of the good. This is his moral argument. If there is good in the universe, if we see someone doing good, we measure that good based off of an ultimate good, and we can measure good versus evil based off of the ultimate form, which is the good, where we derive our existence, so therefore God. Then he came up with the cosmological argument. All right, this was the original in Laws X, is the writing that Plato argued that the soul is the source of all motion. So the cosmological argument, or motion, this was the start of this particular philosophy. And he came up with the idea that the soul is superior to the human body. The soul is more important. It's what drives and runs the body. And so the motion of the universe, everything that moves, must be guided by a supreme soul. So that's Plato's cosmological argument for God. And then his last one was the immateriality of the divine. Plato opposed materialism. He argued that the true God is non-physical, does not change, and is pure goodness and intelligence or wisdom, however you want to phrase that. So the true God is non-physical, unchanging, and pure goodness. That's why he opposed materialism in his society. So Plato's God is generally understood as the rational organizing principle, or the form of goodness, ultimate goodness, rather than a personal deity like the God of the Bible. Then fast forward about 1500 years, we've got Thomas Aquinas, and he came up with the 5 ways to prove the existence of God. He was born in 1225 AD. He was an Italian friar, considered the most influential medieval philosopher of the Catholic Church. He's famous for synthesizing Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine. And he did that to defend the harmony of faith and reason. And he authored the largest volume, Summa Theologica, which defended the Christian faith. So his 5 proofs for the existence of God are defined in this way. Number 1, it was the way of motion. And his statements are this: all bodies are either potentially in motion or actually in motion. So humans, animals, planets, everything. It's either in motion or it's potentially in motion. Nothing can be reduced from the potential to actual unless there is something that is actually moving that changes it. So nothing can be both actually and potentially moving in the same respect. Therefore, with respect to motion, nothing can be 2 things, moving and not moving. Based on those principles, he came up with the idea that, or the logical premise that nothing can move by itself. It has to be put in motion by something else. So if there is not something that began moving things, there would be no motion in the universe. The planets would not move, nothing would move. But there is motion. Therefore, there has to be a first mover, which is God. So that's his number 1 proof of a God, is the fact that things move in this world. The second one is the efficient cause. And he said, nothing is the efficient cause of itself. If A is the efficient cause of item B, then if A did not exist, B doesn't either. So efficient causes are ordered from the first cause through intermediate causes to the ultimate effect that you see. So by those 2 statements, if there is no first cause, there cannot be an ultimate effect. But we see effects in everything that we see. Therefore, there has to be a first cause for everything. And if you travel that all the way back in time to the Big Bang, and then what caused that, and then what caused that, and then what caused that, the first cause of everything has to be a God. So that's the argument of efficient cause. And then the third one is the possibility versus necessity. And this argument from Thomas Aquinas states that we find in nature things that are possible to be and things that are not possible to be, contingent beings. Everything is either necessary or it is contingent. So if we assume that everything is contingent, nothing is necessary, it is impossible for those things to have always existed. For that which cannot be at some time is not. So these are the arguments that Thomas Aquinas made. And he said, therefore, if you assume that everything was contingent, nothing was necessary, then at one point in time there was nothing. And that which does not exist can only begin to exist through something that already existed. So, if everything is contingent, then by logic, there is nothing that exists now. But we know that's not true. There is something here. We're having this discussion. So we know, therefore, that number 3 is false, where he said, assume that everything is contingent. We know that's not true. Something was necessary, or nothing would exist right now. So therefore, by these statements, we know that there is one, at least, necessary being before anything existed. That's pure logic. There must be a God by virtue of the fact that things exist right now. So let me break it down in simple words for you. The logic behind this is contingent beings are things that are possible to be or not. Aquinas observes that objects in nature are born and die, meaning they are not necessary for the universe. They can exist or not exist, plants, people, etc. The problem with total contingency is if everything is merely possible or contingent, then logically there must have been a time when nothing existed. So that leads him to the necessity of existence. If there was ever a time when nothing existed, nothing could have ever begun to exist, and nothing would exist now. And that's absurd. We all know things exist. So that leads us to the necessary being. Based on those 3 things, we know that not all beings are merely contingent or possible. There must exist at least one thing that is necessary, something that logically cannot not exist. That's what it means by necessary. If I die, I'm not necessary. The universe moves on. The planets still move. Okay, so I am contingent. The planet Earth is contingent. It is not necessary. But by virtue of those facts, there must be something that is necessary that cannot not exist, because we need that necessary thing to cause the unnecessary things or the contingent things to come into existence. And there can be no infinite regression. This necessary being cannot have its necessity caused by another, because then there would be an infinite chain with no first cause of necessity. And then everything is contingent, which goes back to the beginning, and it's a circular argument. So there has to be a beginning and a first cause of necessity from a necessary being or God. So the key implication, of course, is that that first initial necessary being that must exist is the source of existence, and it's what everyone calls God. Now, Thomas Aquinas' 4th way of proving God is gradation. And he stated that there is a gradation to be found in things. Some things are better than others. Some things are hotter, some things are colder, etc. So things are an X in proportion to how close they resemble what is most X. So things are hot based on how closely they resemble what is most hot. Oh, that's scalding, or no, it's just warm, right? So, therefore, if there is nothing which is most of that thing, then there can be nothing which is that thing. So, if there's no hottest thing in the universe, then there can be no hot things because we have nothing to compare it to. We wouldn't call it hot. So, there has to be an ultimate X for everything. So, that follows that if there's anything good in the world, there has to be something that is most good. So this is the gradation of things where things are gradually better and better and better or worse and worse and worse. So therefore, if there's any good at all in the world, there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being good and everything else that is perfect. There has to be if there's any good in the universe. And this is what we call God, the ultimate measure of things that are good. And then his fifth one is the argument of design. We observe that natural bodies act toward ends. Anything that acts toward an end either acts out of knowledge or under the direction of something with knowledge. And he said, as the arrow is directed by the archer. So many natural things do not have knowledge. Therefore, some intelligent beings exist by whom all natural things are directed to their end. And this being is what we call God. So those are Thomas Aquinas's 5 arguments for why God must exist. Now tune in next time and we'll see what the Bible says about all of these things. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep searching for truth.